Now let's update our address card component in order to pass in the data rather than hardcode the data like this. So what we'd like to do is pass in this information and have the address card display that information depending on what's passed in. There are a couple of different options here, and we'll look at the simple one first and the more complicated one later. The simple one is if you're passing data inline. So let's take a look at that now. Where is this address card being used? It's being used in app.component.html, and this is how it's being used, right? So this is the access of the address card. So when you're using a particular component, using its selector, we'd like to pass in the data at this point. The way to pass in data to a component is using an attribute. This is very similar to how you configure, quote unquote, configure HTML elements. For instance, let's say you have something like this. Let's say you have an image tag, right? An image tag displays an image in the browser, right? It's a typical HTML tag. And how do you pass in the image link that it needs to be displayed? You pass in by using something like this, src equals, and then the path to the image, right? So the way you pass in data to this image tag is using this attribute, is using this property called src, and then the value is specified by using the equals and then the value within quotes, right? So Angular components also have a similar way of passing in data. So for instance, let's say you want to pass in name over here. You have foobar as a name hard-coded. Let's say I want to pass in the name as a parameter to this component. I can do something like this, name equals, and then the new name, and you can code the address card component to accept this name and use it however it wants. In this case, I want to accept this name and display it instead of this hard-coded value. Now, how do I accept this property? The way to do this is to access that attribute from the address card component by declaring that this component accepts an input by the name of name. All right, so this is what we are going to be passing in. So we need to somehow get that value. Angular is good with that. Angular provides all the attributes that are passed into your component to you if you ask it to. How do you ask Angular to get the name property that's passed to the component? The way you do this is first by declaring a member variable of the class that holds on to that value. So in this case, let's say I'm going to call this, and this is going to be a string. So this is what is going to hold on to that value. You basically need to tell, hey, Angular, whatever is being passed to this component, whatever is the value that's being passed to the component, can you please populate this to this username so that I can use it in my code? So if Angular does that, then you can use this over here, right? So all you need to do here is instead of foobar, you just say this dot username, and that's it, done. So how do you tell Angular to take that value that was passed to the usage of that component and populate this thing over here? You use this by using another annotation. The annotation here is called @input, and you have to use the open close parentheses here. You're going to be passing in something over here. We'll talk about that in a minute, but this is the annotation you need to use to tell Angular that this is an input member variable. You are allowing people to pre-populate this value when they're using your component. All right. So this input is a class that you import from @angular/core. I'm going to click this so that it adds it to the existing import over here. So input is one of the things that gets imported. Now by this, you're basically telling Angular that this needs to be pre-populated by Angular. Angular really needs to do the work of getting the input value from the usage of that component and populating it to this thing here. Now, not only do I have to mark this as an input, I also need to tell it what is the property that it needs to look up. So there could be a bunch of properties over here, a bunch of attributes. Foo equals something, and then bar equals something. So you have a whole lot of properties over here. What you need to do is tell Angular which property you're actually interested in. Which value does it actually need to set to this username field? You do that by specifying the property here, which happens to be name, within these parentheses. All right, so you're basically saying, okay, this is a member variable that is going to take a value which is supplied by the user of this component, and the value that it's going to take is the name property when the component is used. With this, Angular knows what you expect it to do, right? It's going to look at this, it's going to pick this name property, here it happens to be new name, and it's going to set that value to this member variable so that it's available to you whenever you use it. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to save this. I'm going to get rid of these properties. And then I'm going to be doing one change here, which is moving this out of the constructor and into this method over here called ng_onInit. And now you see here, you get the value here. I can change the name here, press save, and then it picks up whatever is passed here. All right. So this should be simple. Now we might be wondering, what did I do over here? Why did I take this out from the constructor and into this method called ng_onInit? We've been seeing this in our components for a while now. When we run the Angular CLI, it generates this method by default, but we haven't been using it. This is the first time we're using it. Now what's going on? We will tackle that in the next video, but for now, I want you to understand that there are a couple of things that are happening here. First, you're passing in a value to a component. And how do you access that in the component? Well, you first create a member variable for it, and then you declare it with @input, and then you tell Angular what is the attribute that you're actually interested in. And Angular is going to look at that attribute. If a value is being passed by the consumer of that component, it's going to take that value and it's going to populate this for you. And then you can use this in your class. The fact that we happen to be using this inside a method called ng_onInit is something we're going to be looking at in the next video.